Good afternoon or good evening for those of you joining us in some parts of the world. Good morning to others. Welcome to this event, which is Unpacking Turkish Foreign Policy. It's part of the series that we launched a few weeks ago. Today we're going to be looking at Turkey's Syria policy, which is very dynamic. We're going to be exploring what Ankara's goals are, what objectives it has 2 months following Basar Al-Assad's departure or fleeing from Syria. We are going to have two great speakers give us this deep dive into Syria, who I'm going to briefly introduce. First of all, His Excellency Ömer Önhon, hope I pronounced that correctly, who is the former Turkish ambassador to Syria. I think he was the last Turkish ambassador to Syria. And he has also held several other high-ranking roles in the Turkish foreign ministry. He's also been working in the think tank world. Welcome to you, Ambassador. And we have Dareen Khalifa, who's a senior advisor at the International Crisis Group. She has more than 15 years experience working on the Middle East. So I think the combination we have here with us today is great, such experience and knowledge in this part of the world. We're going to start with a set of sort of questions and answers with the speakers, sort of discussion with me, and then I'm going to turn to you, the audience, for your questions. As is usual, you can put them by either clicking on the hand icon, and you can give your question verbally, which we always like to hear, or you can put your question into the Q&A box, which as usual is the bottom of the screen. So please do that. You can already start to do that throughout the meeting, so that I already have a list of questions ready to give. But I want to start by asking both of you a sort of more general question before we sort of dig deep down into Turkey's policy, and that's to ask you to give us a sort of, brief, I mean, brief's quite difficult actually, I think, but as brief as you can on how you see the current situation in Syria on the ground today, and the main challenges that are facing the interim president, Ahmet al-Shara. Maybe I'll start first with you, Ambassador, and then we will come to you, Dareen.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. The Syrian crisis has been going on for 13 years now, or 14 years rather. And now we are in a new stage. I think the best way to describe the situation in Syria today is that there is a new Syria in the making. Actually, there is a new Middle East in the making, and Syria is probably one of the most important parts of that region. Now, Bashar al-Assad and his regime, they are gone, but the reasons which have led to the crisis which started in 2011, and then the civil war, and then the collapse of the Assad regime, I mean, he is gone, but the reasons which led to all these developments, most of them are there. So by no means one could say that the crisis Syria is now out of the trouble zone and everything is back to normal and so on. It is not, and it's simply into another stage in that episode of the history of Syria. So at the end of the process, we are going through a process now. It will either be a bright future, or it will be back to the civil strife. So let's hope that the first alternative will work and not the second one, but there is that risk. Now, there is a temporary government in Syria. There is a president who is going to lead the transition, and we don't know how long that transition will take. There was a roadmap which included a new constitution, a new election law, and then elections and so on. But it was not accompanied by a timetable. So we don't know how long this transition period will take. The only thing that we know is that El Shara said that it would take 3 to 5 years. Now, in the Middle East, making promises for after 3 to 5 years of that sort are hard to believe, really. So it should not be taken as granted. We really don't know what will happen after 3 to 5 years. Now, there are a lot of challenges, many challenges in the security field, first of all, and then in the economic field. I mean, we have a devastated country. Most of or an important portion of the infrastructure is gone, and the part that is not gone is out of date. So you really need to build a country from scratch, and this is quite a challenge. As I said, there is the security issue. I mean, inside actors plus outside actors. I mean, you have too many countries which are involved in Syria, but which have different agendas and different priorities, and mostly conflicting priorities. So I think this is really a very important element in this process. And then we have the internal fault lines. Syria is a multi-sectarian, multi-ethnic country. And these fault lines, they can easily at some point turn into a new civil war, a new crisis, a new strife, and so on. So the country, as I said at the beginning, Assad regime has gone. It's no longer there. But then the reasons which threaten Syria, which made Syria suffer for the last 13, 14 years, are still there. So we have a very delicate process ahead of us, I would say.
Thank you, Ambassador. This was a very comprehensive overview, I think, in a very short period of time. I would like to ask you, Dareen, as well, to share your thoughts, perhaps as well touching on, the ordinary Syrian folk, because obviously there was a lot of elation after Assad fled the country. We've seen many people celebrating, and even from Europe and elsewhere, Syrian refugees returning. But at the same time, they face huge challenges as well. I mean, as the ambassador mentioned, economic challenges, places to live. How do you see, the day-to-day life of ordinary people in Syria these days?
Thank you so much, Amanda, for having me. And thank you, Ambassador, for this very comprehensive and precise overview of the situation in Syria. Let me start by saying that things are going much better than a lot of us had anticipated. A lot have assumed that if and when a regime would collapse in Syria, that sectarian violence and honestly, all doors of hell will break loose. So far, what we're seeing is that the new administration or the interim government has been saying pretty much all the right things, trying to reassure its base domestically, but also trying to reassure the region and the international community that it has treaded its jihadist past, that this is a new phase in Syria, as Ambassador Ömer pointed out, that they are willing to engage in a somewhat inclusive manner. We've also seen that while revenge killings are happening, they're kept at minimum. They're much less than, again, a lot of us had anticipated, that Damascus is trying to act quickly if and when these occurrences happen. That said, the challenges are immense. And again, I completely agree with Ambassador Ömer that the security challenges in particular are grave. So the security forces in Damascus are quite stretched thin. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, basically the main rebel group that liberated Damascus, has around 30,000 fighters in its ranks. and it's still in the process of negotiating with other rebel groups in Syria to kind of merge everyone into a unified central command for a national army. That's been it's been announced that they're going to do this, but the process of implementation is of course challenging for all the obvious reasons. So that's a huge issue that they're trying to address. The economy is a very, very big challenge as well. Syria's under a web of US and European sanctions that have been there for decades. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham itself is sanctioned by most countries as a terrorist organization. Ahmad al-Shara himself is designated as a terrorist. So there's a complex and incredibly deeply rooted web of sanctions and designations imposed on the country and on its leadership that is making it very complicated for people to invest in Syria, for governments to fund reconstruction projects, for even ordinary Syrians to come back and engage in economic activities or in political activities in the country. So, and despite some positive steps in easing these sanctions from the EU and from European states, and also from the US, I think the overall impact of these sanctions continue to be very heavy-handed on the country and its economy. Politically speaking, we have been seeing a flurry of diplomatic engagement, be it international or even regional. I think most regional countries, aside from Israel and yeah, I think aside from Israel, really, I can't even count one other country that hasn't really rushed to go to Damascus and meet with the leadership there. So there's a lot of positive steps politically, but also, I mean, there remain big elephants in the room, including what Israel will be doing in the next phase. So what they've done early on is that they've acted militarily once the regime fell, and they've obliterated almost 80% of Syria's military infrastructure. And they've also moved on the ground and basically broke the disengagement agreement between Syria and Israel that's been there since 1974. So it occupied additional territory in the Golan Heights, of course, raising a lot of concern among not just the authorities, but among ordinary Syrians who see this as incredibly lawful and hurtful to Syria's national sovereignty. So whether we have seen like kind of a detente since, but it's unclear how Tel Aviv sees the new administration at this point and how much they're going to be willing to kind of maintain the quiet for the time being. Now, another wild card, and I'll stop here, is obviously the Trump administration. It again is still unclear in which direction this administration is going to go in terms of its engagement with Syria. Whether or not the US is going to be willing to ease sanctions significantly and allow for reconstruction money to pour into the country is going to be the big question mark that is going to really dictate the future of the economy of the country. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dareen, for this great overview, and what you just mentioned about President Trump, I think is absolutely correct. I think he's a wild card still on many issues. But I want to move now to Turkey, the topic of today's conversation. I want to come back to you, Ambassador Önhon, to talk a bit about Turkey's strategic objectives in Syria. I mean, since I was working on Turkey, I've seen many, turns and twists in Turkish policy in Syria. So I'd like to have your sort of assessment, or how have the strategic objectives changed since the downfall of former President Assad to now? I mean, what's Turkey's main goals in Syria?
Thank you. Well, when the crisis first started in Syria, Turkey tried hard to see that the crisis did not spread. I mean, Turkey tried to help to keep Syria not to move to the next stage, which was the civil war. Because in 2011, in March, we could see that if things moved along the lines that we were seeing then, terrible tragedies could not be avoided. And since Turkey has 911 kilometers of common border with Syria, everything that happened over there would affect us directly. I mean, we naturally saw that, and we tried to make sure that the crisis did not grow and spread. But unfortunately, Turkey was not successful in that. And after August, it took sides. I mean, Turkey said that it's not going to stand by the Assad regime, which started killing its people, but would stand by the side of the people, whatever that means. So, and beginning in August 2011, really everything that happened over there had a direct impact on Turkey. First of all, security-wise, suddenly Turkey was faced with neighbors in the shape of YPG, which equals PKK, and ISIS, just beyond our borders. Then we had an inflow and influx of Syrian refugees. They started to come. The first party was like 152 people, I think. And then this turned into thousands and tens of thousands. And at one point, we had at least 3.5 million, according to the official figures, 3.5 million Syrians in Turkey. Then the economic situation had very adverse effects, of course, because if you look at the map, you'll see that the Turkish route into the Middle East goes either through Iraq or Syria. Now, Iraq was closed for several years for several reasons, and then Syria, the Syrian route, also was out of the equation, and that pushed Turkey to look for new routes to go to the markets in the Gulf region and so on. So, plus there were, of course, social effects on Turkey. I mean, a variety of them. So Turkey's strategic aim, objective at this stage was to make sure that the country, the crisis ended, the civil war ended, and then again to have a stable, as much as possible, stable Syria next to our borders. But the problem then was that the third parties were involved. We had the United States suddenly having YPG as a local partner. We had Iran as a full fighting force. We had Russia establishing bases and engaging very deeply in the Syrian war. So we suddenly had all kinds of third side actors which engage with each other also. And really that put Turkey in a very troublesome position for a long time. I mean, on the one hand, you had to make sure that the terror organizations over there, the YPG and ISIS, did not dominate the area. But then on the other hand, you had to make sure that Russia and Iran did not really have a negative impact on Turkey's policies. Then you had to balance it with the United States and so on. So it was very delicate, really. And at one point, I remember Turkey being, squeezed in between. We were just caught up in that conflict. And in 2020, the conditions pushed Turkey to make some difficult choices. And as you know, the Astana process started. There was this trio, engagement, Turkey, Russia and Iran and so on. And there was some kind of peace or ceasefire rather in the country, but not an easy one, a very uneasy one, a very fragile one, and a ceasefire which required many sacrifices on Turkey's part, I think. But this was the best deal that we could get in that situation. But then Syria was not in the ideal position because the country was divided into several sections, like the Idlib up in the north west, and then the Turkish operation areas, as we refer to them, then the area under the control of Assad, and also the area under the control of the YPG. Now, Assad was able to keep his seat in Damascus, his house of power, his seat of power rather. But obviously, it could be seen very clearly that it will be very difficult for him to retain that position, because keeping your seat of power does not really mean that you will indefinitely keep that power, because nothing was improved really. Even his own supporters, the Alevite community, they suffered even though they were able to retain power. And you see that when HTS started its operation just last year, the army did not fight. And the reason that they did not fight was they did not want to fight for something which really deprived them of everything that they had. Every family had great losses. They were poor. They did not grow richer or anything. So they simply did not fight. And there was a very major security vacuum in Syria, which really hurt Turkey very much. Now, at one point, Turkey tried to make a deal with Syria through Russia, with the Assad regime. The situation was so bad that Turkey said, well, if this is what we are going to have, then we have to make a deal with them. And they tried to make that deal with Assad. But then in the meantime, things were developing and the HTS took power. And then now there is a very fresh environment over there. But as I said at my opening remarks, there is no guarantee. I agree with Dareen. The situation now is much better. At least there is hope for the future compared to the Assad regime. But then we still have a process. And I think now, strategically, the strategic objective of Turkey is that we have a stable and safe Syria, which will not breed security threats for Turkey. We have a Syria that will not be divided into pieces. The territorial integrity of the country is very important for Turkey. We have a Syria that will be inclusive, embracing all the different segments of the Syrian society, so that it will not lead to a war between different ethnic groups or different sectarian groups, and plus more elements, of course. But we, at this stage, we want a safe and secure Syria, which would not be a breeding ground for terror organizations or for proxy wars or fighting between third parties and so on. Now, is that easy? Is that something easy to achieve? It's very difficult, really. It's very complicated, but that is the objective. To have a safe and secure neighborhood. That would be the strategic objective, I would say.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this very detailed history, actually, of Turkey, but not only Turkey and Syria, but Syria in general. I think this was a really great scene setup for understanding the stakes in Syria. I want to come to you now, Dareen, because we've heard now from the ambassador a lot about Turkish approach and policy and objectives in Syria. But as we know, there's many other actors that are also vying for influence in Syria, if that's the right if that is the right terminology. How do you see that playing out in terms of which ones of those other actors, countries are stronger? And perhaps you could also comment on the demise of Russia and Iran in Syria. Previously, both, well, particularly Iran, a strong actor, but Russia was there. What does that mean for Syria, and what could it potentially mean as well? I mean, how will Turkey fit in with these other actors?
That's a very good question. I mean, Turkey's increasing influence and leverage over Damascus is unquestionable for sure. But as you have rightly put it, they're not the only actor vying for influence. But Damascus is also very keen on diversifying its foreign relations. So what I'm seeing so far is that Shara and the new authorities in Damascus are very they're really doing this balancing act in which they're not only trying to not come across as a Turkish proxy or a Turkish vessel, but they're taking concrete steps in order to diversify their foreign relations. So we saw that the acting president's first visit was to Saudi, the foreign minister's first visit was to Saudi. They were very keen to, I mean, they didn't even do it subtly. They actually said, we're keen to make the first foreign visit to an Arab country in order to reinstate Syria as part of the Arab orbit. That was a clear message to Arab regional countries. It was a clear message to the Iranians on where their influence lies. But it's also a clear message to everyone that they are not a Turkish proxy. And I think that's a very important message, because while there's a lot of overlap in terms of interests and objectives between Ankara and Damascus today on where they would like to see the future of Syria, I think there's a lot of potential areas of where things can go wrong. And we haven't yet talked in depth about the northeast of the country and the Kurdish-led forces, but I'm sure we're going to get questions on that, so we can delve deeper into this. But I don't look at it from who has the upper hand over Damascus, and I don't think that's necessarily the right way to look at it. But I think what we're seeing currently, and what we're going to see in the near future, is that a lot of Gulf Arab countries in particular that are able to foot the bill for Syria's reconstruction and for bailing Damascus out of its current economic crisis, and for potentially offering the check on the payroll of some of the government functioning authorities, are going to have some leverage over Damascus, right? Whether or not they're going to decide to do that is yet to be seen. We are hearing a lot of chatters about willingness, specifically from Doha, to step in their financial support. There's also some talk about Saudi offering some financial relief and assistance. So obviously these countries, if they're willing and able, they're able, but if they're willing to actually foot the bill on some of that stuff, they are going to have a lot of influence. Now, I don't necessarily think that is going to counterbalance or that is not going to negate Turkish influence, because as Ambassador Ömer pointed out, like, geography is in Turkey's favor. There's over a 900-kilometer border being shared with the country, right? But Turkey's security concerns and strategic concerns in Syria are huge, whether it's about refugee returns or the SDF-controlled parts of the country. So what Turkey wants in Syria it really, really wants, and it's going to pursue. And I think that's something we as Crisis Group have been saying for years. No country, not even Russia or Iran, were able to really bypass what Turkey wanted in Syria or their concerns, right? But then there are other sets of issues, what I call the tactical kind of objectives that Ankara has in terms of economic benefits, reconstruction projects, for instance, Turkish companies piling in and trying to like put themselves in a more favorable position in terms of having the lead in terms on reconstruction and other issues. These are all things where Ankara is really going to have competition. But again, in terms of their strategic objectives, I don't think Damascus is going to push back necessarily on any of it. I think they're on the same page in terms of trying to address a lot of Turkey's concerns and ensuring that Ankara's interests and concerns are addressed in a way that would avoid further military interventions in the country against the will of the authorities there.
Thank you very much, Dareen. I want to stay on the issue of security and come back to you, Ambassador. During the recent meeting that took place between President Erdogan and Mr. Al-Shara, I think in Turkey, the issue of security was a key point of the agenda. And I think that President Erdogan has been pushing to take over the sort of fight against terrorism in Syria. This obviously would include, ISIS, but also the Kurdish fighters, as Dareen just mentioned. I mean, the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, which includes the YPG, as we know, Turkey views this as part of the PKK. I'd like to hear your insights onto that. How likely is that Turkey will get this sort of, green card, if I can call it that, to go ahead? And if that's the case, I mean, what sort of implications is this going to have for the relationship with the US, between the US and Turkey? Because this is obviously not something the US would want to see, or under President Biden. I don't know what the situation is with President Trump. That still remains to be seen, but it would be good to get your insights on this.
Thank you very much. Again, during the visit of Ahmet Al-Shara, we don't know what exactly they discussed, of course, but from what we heard from the joint press conference and from people who follow these meetings, two major issues were taken up. One of them was in the field of economy and the reconstruction of Syria, and what Turkey could do to help to support them. And secondly, and most importantly, I think it was security. Now, going back to this joint press conference, they said Turkey and Syria share common concerns, threats are common, and that they had decided to have a deep strategic cooperation in a variety on a variety of issues. And the two elements that they specifically mentioned were ISIS and YPG, or SDF, the umbrella. Now, we know that Turkey has been trying to get a bigger share of ISIS, I mean, fighting against ISIS. And during the press conference, President Erdogan said that Turkey will support Syria in making sure that there is no revival of ISIS. And Turkey was also prepared to support the Syrian security forces in securing the camps, Al-Hol and others, which hold ISIS people and their families. Now, the major reason for doing that, of course, I mean, why is Turkey enthusiastic in taking on ISIS? One, they are a major threat for us. I mean, we have lost a lot of people in Turkey because of bombings by ISIS and attacks by ISIS. And secondly, the YPG, which, as you said, Turkey considers as the extension of the PKK terror organization in Syria, has been using ISIS as the main argument for their existence and for the continuation of support from the US. I mean, the YPG is presenting itself as probably like the major and only force even, which has directly engaged ISIS and has been fighting them. And if its efforts are hampered, then ISIS will revive. Now, that's not correct, really, because YPG has indeed fought ISIS, but so has Turkish armed forces, so has other coalition forces, so has the US. So YPG has been a part of the fight against ISIS, but it has not been the only fighting force as it has been trying to present itself. Now, so Turkey has given the message that we will be here to fight against ISIS. So YPG is not the only fighting force. And then the YPG, the problem with YPG is they have been pursuing their own agenda since the beginning of the crisis in 2011. They have formed their armed forces in the form of YPG, and they have been equipped and trained by the United States. I mean, that's no secret. Everybody is very well aware of that, and it is officially acknowledged, actually. And now the YPG controls like 28 to 29% of Syrian territory in northeast Syria. And even as important is that the territory that it controls is where almost all of the oil fields of Syria is. Now, Syria needs every dollar, every cent to rebuild the country. And if I recall rightly, before the war, the daily production of oil was 380,000 barrels per day. And that's a lot of money, you know, for a country which is in need of rebuilding. And unfortunately, the Syrians are not able to use that money because the oil fields are not under their control. So Turkey looks at the issue to the YPG from the perspective of being a terror organization posing a threat directly to Turkey. And secondly, as an organization which aims to impose its will on the rest of the Syrian people. I mean, we know that Mazlum Kobani, for example, the commander of the YPG, he is on record for saying that YPG is for the territorial integrity of Syria. But then what they say and what they do not really match. I mean, they are trying to carve out a portion of the territory in Syria and to keep and to maintain their rule over there. Now, this is a concern for Turkey, but this is even a bigger concern for the Syrians, I think. I mean, it's not only Turkey which is opposing YPG to impose its will on the Syrian people, but it's the rest of the Syrians. For example, the Arab Syrians, the other elements of the Syrian society, they would not like to see a certain section of the society to impose its will and to retain a certain part of Syria under its control. Of course, it's not for Turkey or anybody else, for that matter, to tell to Syrians how to govern themselves. But then, equally, it would not be for any part of the Syrian society to impose what they want, how they want to rule the country. So it should be a joint decision by all the segments of the Syrian society, which would decide the future of the country. Now, the United States has been supporting YPG, as I said. I mean, they have trained them, they have equipped them, and they have, 2,000 or so US military in Syria, side by side with the YPG. We don't know. We knew what Biden administration did, but we don't know what the policy of the Trump administration will be. There are mixed messages coming from there. I mean, personally, I still don't know what the policy of Trump on Syria is. We know that he's always very unhappy with having US troops abroad, but that does not necessarily mean that he will withdraw the US troops from Syria, because there are very major strategic interests of the United States over there. I mean, Israel's security, Iran, Russia, and so on and so forth. But we don't know what their policy will be. But now, what we see from here is that they are a little bit more receptive to trying to cover Turkey's concerns also. Whereas during the Biden administration, especially the first years of that period, they did not really care at all as to what Turkey's concerns were and so on. But I really cannot say anything about how Trump is going to deal with the issue. But they appear to be a little bit more prone to satisfying Turkey's interests also.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, again for very comprehensive insights onto these questions. I'm going to start to put a couple of the questions that we have in the chat box because we have a few. I'm going to come back to you now, Dareen. I mean, first of all, I wanted to ask you about a question about the camps that are in Syria that were briefly mentioned by the ambassador, because obviously there's still quite a lot of foreign fighters, women and children in those camps. I mean, there's been a reluctance from a number of European countries to actually return their own citizens. In some cases, citizenships have been revoked. I'd like to hear your views on that, and what do you think should be the approach on to these camps? And then I would like to put the question from Serkan Doğan Yılmaz also to you, Dareen. He's asking whether it's possible for Turkey to engage with the EU and US to ensure a coordinated approach to Syria's stabilization and reconstruction, given the ongoing support of both entities for the YPG-PYD.
Great. Would it be possible to also cover quickly the question about a potential agreement between Turkey and the Northeast?
Because sure. That's okay. I'm just gonna ask both of you to be more shorter in your answers than before, because we don't have that much time left. I should have had a longer event, but please, the floor is yours, Dareen.
Absolutely. Just give me a couple of minutes or a few minutes. But very, very quickly, I think, generally speaking, this is an opportune moment to find an end game to Northeast Syria that would address Turkey's security concerns, right? There is already a political track in negotiations ongoing between Damascus and the Kurdish-led forces in the Northeast. I think both parties, in principle, at least agree that there needs to be an end state in which the Northeast is folded within the Syrian state, militarily, administratively, all the natural resources that the ambassador spoke about, everything, the border control, everything needs to be under the control of the central government. That doesn't mean that the SDF is going to sign off on a surrender agreement. That means that they are going to negotiate a power sharing arrangement in which Damascus will have the upper hand over the border areas and over the more strategic assets of the Northeast. I think if and when that happens, and I think it's just a matter of time before both parties agree to something, that will de facto mean addressing Turkey's concerns in the Northeast, right? In parallel to that, and that's a bigger conversation that needs a panel of its own, but there are already talks between Turkey and the PKK, between Ankara and the PKK in Turkey. And I think we're seeing very fast movement on that track. And again, if and when there is a settlement of sorts between the PKK and Ankara, that will absolutely trickle down on the YPG and the SDF's fate in northeastern Syria. So both these tracks are moving quite quickly in a rather unprecedented manner. So we need to keep an eye out on those, and I think we can't rule out. Now, quickly to the camps. The camps have been a horrific tragedy for the last, 7, 8 years. The situation there is incredibly inhumane. One thing we've always argued is that leaving people there indefinitely is neither a solution, nor from not from a political standpoint, nor from a strategic one, and definitely not from a humanitarian one. Like, you have kids who were 6 and 7 years old, and now they're teenagers. They grew up in the camp. They've not committed crimes, but they have been radicalized and have been living in completely inhumane situations. So for European countries, but also for regional countries, and for the Syrians and Iraqis as well that are left in the camp, this is not a solution. Right? There needs to be a resolve to this question. And that resolve has to be with the more capable countries, aka the European countries, really not wasting any more time on taking their citizens and dealing with them. All the arguments that this is going to cause a political backlash or domestic backlash, I think, have been refuted by other countries who have taken their citizens and have worked on legally processing them and rehabilitating them within their societies. Again, leaving them in Syria, specifically when you have a US administration that is willing to pull out of the country over a tweet, is incredibly, I think, diplomatic, very risky bet that countries are taking. So something needs to be done on that. I think there was a third question that now I can't necessarily remember. But,
I think yeah.
Sorry, I remember, can Turkey and the EU work together? I think Turkey and the EU have to work together on this. EU has the carrots and Turkey has the sticks, or often the other way around. But I think, Turkey and the EU have to work together because, again, the Europeans have imposed all these sanctions on the former regime and have the terrorism designations, as I mentioned, remain on Syria's de facto authorities. Turkey has a lot of leverage over them, as we pointed out, so they can help nudge them to achieve whatever benchmarks and whatever asks European countries are going to put forward. They have, and I think since 2020, they've been nudging Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and its leadership in the right direction in terms of behavioral change and opening up to society and how they deal with minorities and whatnot. And I think they can continue to play a very constructive role because they've built a trust relationship with the authorities that European countries still are in a very nascent stage of doing. So I do think it's key that there's coordination between Turkey and the EU and European states in terms of the next steps. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Dareen. I'm going to come back to you now, Ambassador. The question from Aisha Urekli, which is also actually related to the EU. She's asking if you could assess the potential for cooperation with Turkey in Syria's reconstruction in the broader transition and remaking of the Middle East. Is Turkey a competitor or a partner in shaping the region's future? Given Turkey's historically low alignment with the EU CFSP, could recent geopolitical developments open new avenues for a closer alignment, which could signal renewed commitment in EU-Turkey cooperation?
Well, thank you. I think there is really a lot of room for cooperation between Turkey and the EU. To the benefit of both sides. Actually, since the beginning of crisis in 2011, we have cooperated. Turkey and the EU have cooperated on a number of occasions, but we also had skirmishes between us that you did more, you could do less, and so that sort of thing. But definitely the problem in Syria is so big that no country by itself can overcome the problems. There is definitely a need for international cooperation. Not even Gulf countries with all that finance can overcome the problem. So it is an international effort, and I think alignment between Turkey and EU is really essential in that case. I hope that they will grab that opportunity, which may also reflect on other dimensions of their relations. Now, Turkey will definitely have a major role to play in Syria, in the reconstruction of Syria. And when I talk about reconstruction, that's not only economic terms, but political, security-wise, military-wise. I mean, you are building a new country. You are reconstructing a new system. And I think Turkey will really play a very important role in that. But I think Dareen said at the beginning that that impression of treating Syria like a vassal state, that is not the case, and it should not be the case. I mean, that would be very detrimental in a number of ways. So that's not the objective of Turkey. It should not be. But we should all try to support Syria in rebuilding itself, because as long as Syria does not improve, it will continue to be a breeding ground for various threats, and it will hurt all of us. So it requires a joint effort. One thing I want to say on the PKK-YPG issue, now there is I don't know how you call it, but there's a kind of process in Turkey between the government and the PKK, I guess. And then there is a process in Syria. And the two processes are tightly connected. I mean, I think they are part of the same package, and they will influence each other. I mean, whatever happens in one side of the borderline will affect what happens on the other side of the borderline. I think that's a very important and delicate issue that we will see in the coming days. Now, the power sharing arrangement is really important, and that brings me to what I said previously. The power sharing arrangement should not be in the form of one party imposing its will on the others, but it should be a joint decision, a common decision of all the segments of the Syrian society. Otherwise, in case one of the parties drives for imposing its will on the others, that will really bring in a new crisis, and this is something which we should definitely try to avoid.
Great, thank you, Ambassador. I'm going to quickly go to another question because we have quite a few of them. I'm going to come back to you, Dareen, because this questioner, who's anonymous, is saying you referred to the process of reunification of rebel groups under the leadership of a new political power in Damascus, the HTS. Could groups refusing to participate in this process pose a threat to Turkey and possible interests in Syria?
That's a really good question, and I do think this is the crux of the issue when it comes to the security conundrum Syria is facing today. So you have, I think, 4 categories of rebels operating in Syria, right? So you have, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and then you have the Turkish-backed rebels, what we refer to as the Syrian National Army. And then you have the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, and then you have pseudo-autonomous groups that have been operating in south of the country, right? So there are various degrees of cooperation in this process of merger of all armed groups. So far, and in principle, everyone, including the SDF, have said they're willing to merge into a national army. So no one is stating publicly that they are going to go against this process. That said, the devil is in the details, and it's much easier said than done. when you're trying to build a national army from scratch, especially if you're not relying on former regime officers. And I think that's going to be a category in of itself. But again, it's a tough process, and we're seeing some also rebel groups saying, it's a matter of sequencing. Why should we disarm before others do? Now, my sense is that it's going to be a matter of time before everyone wheels to the decision. It is going to take longer than the authorities in Damascus thought it would. It's going to be more challenging than they thought it would. But at the end of the day, they're willing to strong arm these rebels. But in the scenario you laid out, in which some rebel groups are wayward or acts semi-autonomously, of course it's going to constitute a threat, not just to Turkey, but to also Syria's sovereignty and to all neighboring countries. So I think there is kind of consensus between or agreement between what Damascus wants, what Turkey wants, but also what other neighboring countries, including Jordan, for instance, want in terms of a centralization of these rebel forces. But Turkey has a lot of leverage. Again, they are backing, funding, and supporting large number of fighters currently. My understanding is that Turkey had agreed to shift its support to the central military rather than to these factions. Again, stemming from the perception that it is within Turkey's interest to do so, and it goes against its national security objectives to have these independent, loosely organized, and without a clear chain of command factions operating south of its border.
Thank you, Dareen. Maybe you want to comment on that last point, Ambassador, but also there's a question here regarding the humanitarian aid that you mentioned for reconstruction. If you happen to know which organizations in Turkey are likely to be involved in this, would you be able to share that information?
I mean, I couldn't really share with you by name which organizations are going to do that, but I know that there are a number of NGOs which have been operating from Turkey, Turkish NGOs who have been assisting the Syrians in need along the borderlines and in Idlib and other places, but I couldn't name them really. But then on the other part, and the state, of course, I mean, the state is going to extend its helping hand, I think, in a big way. Now, as to the armed factions, of course, what is important is you cannot have dozens of armed groups with different ideologies and different priorities running free in the country. So one of the major requirements for success for a unified Syria is to have a unified army, the dissolving of the armed groups and the collecting of the weapons, and designing a new Syrian army. And I think Turkey has been also vocal in that that it is prepared to train and try organize the new army in that sense, which is something which should be done for having a unified army. But would everybody willingly join in the new army? I'm not so sure, really. I haven't heard anybody, as Dareen said, rejecting joining the army. They all said, yes, in principle, we do agree. But then when it comes to negotiating the terms of how to join the army, that's another story. And we'll see. I mean, YPG has been saying that in principle, it accepts to join the army, but that it should keep itself intact and so on. And I don't think that would work for the Syrians, for Damascus. So there is a challenge over there. But I think a unified central army is very important for what happens in Syria in the future.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm afraid we've run out of time. That 60 minutes went by very quickly, and I feel that we only just sort of scratched the surface of the topic in many respects. But I want to thank you both so much for coming and sharing your insights on, well, not just on Turkish policy in Syria, but actually what's going on in Syria more broadly. It was really truly fascinating, and I wish that we would have more time to keep going, and it's certainly a topic that we will return to. It's clear that you both have an amazing experience in this area, so I hope that you will agree to come back on another occasion to further share your insights. I want to thank the audience for joining us. This, as I mentioned in the beginning, is part of a new series of events that we have put together regarding Turkish foreign policy, Unpacking Turkish Foreign Policy. Turkish foreign policy is so interesting that we decided we needed an entire series on it. So you'll be hearing, well, you'll be receiving in your mailbox very soon the next edition of the series. For you in the audience who are interested in the Middle East more broadly, we also have a new series of events actually looking at developments in the Middle East across the board. I think the next event is actually taking place tomorrow, and it will be, if my memory serves me correct, looking at the developments around the war in Gaza, the ceasefire, and all these sorts of issues. So please tune into that if you would like to. Again, thank you very much to our brilliant speakers, and thanks to the audience for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you again on the next series of Unpacking Turkish Foreign Policy. Have a great evening, morning, or afternoon, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.